Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Actually, it's more like 13 and 18 respectively. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. The case of Lizzie Borden, as well as my theory as to how she did it and how she got away with it. Here on Big Pretty Man. Hi, and welcome back to Big Pretty Man, the channel for the extra large man who wants to live his life large and in charge. I'm your host, Timothy Big Pretty Crowe. I'm a wardrobe and lifestyle consultant for the extra large man. Alright guys, in my last video I was showing or demonstrating how to play. And I was showing how I and my girlfriend went to the Renaissance Fair in my fabulous pirate garb. But also, and I've always preached on following your dreams, and part of your dreams is to follow your passions. And I thought that today, for something a little off track from my normal videos, I would talk about one of my passions, and that would be criminology. Particularly the more famous cases, such as the case of Jack the Ripper. And yes, I did go to Whitechapel, and I stayed near the scene of the first famous of the 5 murders, that of Polly Nichols, and took the Jack the Ripper tour. But another one, and the one I want to talk about today, is one that's fascinated me since I was a very small boy, and that is the case of Lizzie Borden and the Borden murders. It's something that I have studied since I was very young. I've read all the court documents. I've read all the transcripts of her testimonies, all the testimonies of everyone that gave testimony, So I've got a really good insight. I've looked at the crime scene, and yes, I did visit Lizzie Borden's house back about 9 years ago, and did the tour. And actually, it told me a lot about this murder. And therefore, I thought that I would not only talk about the Lizzie Borden case, but I would give you my theory on how it was done and how she got away with it. Okay, first, the Lizzie Borden case is probably, and the Borden murders are probably one of the 3 top famous crimes in U.S. history. Second or third only to maybe the O.J. Simpson trial and the Lindbergh baby trial. But Lizzie Borden has now become a legend. It's something that's carried on now for well over 100 years. This murder took place in 1892, and people are still speculating about it here in 2021. So, first, let's go over a bit of the history of the case, for those that may not be familiar. All right. Well, Lizzie Andrew Borden was born in 1860 to Andrew Jackson Borden and Sarah Morse in Massachusetts. They lived in Fall River, Massachusetts. Her father was an extremely wealthy man who had come from a very wealthy family in Fall River. However, he'd come from the poorer end of the family, and he had worked first making furniture and coffins, and then he worked himself up into he owned a massive amount of property, business property for rentals. He also became a president of a bank. He also owned 3 banks, so he also had a lot of domestic rental properties, so and interests in other businesses in the area. So he had actually worked from scratch and made himself a very wealthy man. However, he was a notorious miser. He lived well below his means. He had amassed a fortune that would be worth today around about $10 million, with money still coming in, but yet he still lived in the business district, down near the docks, whereas the rest of the wealthy, and the other Borden family members lived up in the hills with the big houses and the servants. And just to show you how miserly the man really was, we can actually look at this house. It was a house about 19 feet, about 20 feet wide, a 3-story home, and this is the 1890s. Now, in the 1890s, it's famous for being the gaslight period. They didn't have gaslight. They could have had electricity. They didn't have running water. They didn't have a bathroom. They didn't have a bathtub. And even middle-class people at that time were getting these things. So, and therefore he could have had these things and even much more, but no. Instead, they had basically a hand pump for cold water in the kitchen, which they had to take baths in the old-fashioned way in tubs. They had basically an indoor outhouse down in the basement with a water closet, and they burned kerosene lamps. And it's even said that he was so miserly that in the evenings they had to sit in the dark because he didn't want to waste kerosene, coal. So this was a very miserly man, a real Ebenezer Scrooge in real life. He had the two daughters, Emma, who was 10 years older than Lizzie, and their mother, Sarah, actually died when Lizzie was about 2 years old, and her sister Emma promised to take care of her and kind of became a foster mother, surrogate mother to little Lizzie. Andrew did remarry. He married Abigail Durfee, another big family in the area, but she was looking for a husband, and she was much younger than him. And they married not long after, just a few years after his first wife had died. So this was the only mother that Lizzie knew, would remember, but yet there never seemed to be a mother-daughter bond between her or with Emma. In fact, after an argument over some property rights, Lizzie stopped for about 5 years. She stopped calling her mother and called her Mrs. Borden. It looks like the two daughters kind of were against this interloping woman that was in the family. So this is the situation. Now, both of Emma and Lizzie had never married. It's probably very difficult for them to marry, because they lived down in this commercial area and lower income area, because women of their status did not work, so therefore they were dependent on their father, and because they weren't being invited into the big parties on the hill like the other younger women, they weren't attracting the proper prospects for husbands. So both these women were now, by 1892, Lizzie was 32 years old, and her sister was 42. And neither had married. So they were definitely, being as most women married in their late teens or early 20s at that time, they were not only spinsters, but would have considered old maids, practically impossible to get married. And they were completely dependent on their father, who was a miser, and they had to live with this. It said that Lizzie had an allowance of about $4 a week, which is actually a good sum of money, but considering how wealthy they were, I can see how this would have been very frustrating. And one particular thing that took place, which I think really weighs in on the crime that happened, was about 2 years before after Lizzie had been obviously complaining about, living in these means, when she felt like they should be living up on the hill and have all the accoutrements of wealth, he sent her on a tour of Europe with some of her richer Borden cousins. And I think that trip solidified, when she had to come back to this miserly lifestyle, I think that's really when what happened really began to gel. I think at that point some people were doomed. But anyway, so let's go over the crime. The first, we'll go into August 4th, 1892. It was an extremely hot day, and that's something I want you to remember. It was in the upper 90s, very hot. And they had there was, besides her parents, there was the maid named Bridget Sullivan. They all called her Maggie because they couldn't remember her name. They kept calling her the name of the former maid. I'm sure that was fun. and also her uncle had come to visit, the uncle on her mother's side, the dead mother. So his name was John Morris. He'd come to spend the night before. And Emma was actually out of town visiting friends in New Haven. So she was not around. So we have John Morris, the two parents, and the maid. Okay? So in the morning, on this hot day, Uncle Morris left to go visit other relatives. He left fairly early. So did Andrew Borden, the father. He went out to collect his rents and do his business. They left around 8:30, 9 o'clock that morning. So that just left Bridget, Lizzie, and the maid. Well, around about 9, in that area, the Abby told Bridget, the maid, to go out and clean all of the windows, which apparently she wasn't too fond of doing because she didn't feel well and it was so hot. But she did it. She went outside to clean. So she's outside cleaning the windows. According to Lizzie's testimony, her mother told her, stepmother, told her she was going upstairs to put, she'd already made the bed, she was going upstairs to put the pillowcases on the bed. Now, this will be important a little bit later. Now, so Bridget's outside, she goes upstairs. Lizzie, according to her testimony, she flip-flopped on what she said, but she said that she was mostly in the kitchen, either reading a magazine, or ironing handkerchiefs. Now, it's important to note that the bedroom that her stepmother is making the bed is directly over her head. So that's the situation. Around about 10:30, Bridget's back inside the house, and Lizzie's nowhere to be seen at the moment. And all of a sudden, Mr. Borden come home a little bit early. It's said just before 11 a.m. So somewhere between about, say, 10:40 to 10:45, somewhere in that area. He came home. Tried to get in the front door, but it was locked. Bridget went to unlock the door. She's having trouble getting open, and she said she heard Lizzie laughing behind her on the steps that went to the second floor. Okay? She gets the door open, and she says, that she's going to go upstairs and lay down because of the heat. And the father comes in, and Bridget said in her testimony that she heard Lizzie tell her father when he asked, "Where was Mrs. Borden?" She said she got a note from someone being sick and went out. So Bridget goes upstairs, and and Mr. Borden went into the sitting room and laid down on a couch, kind of laid over to take a nap, which apparently was his practice before dinner, for lunch. So now that's the scene. So according to Bridget, she laid down upstairs and she said heard the clock in the center city ring 11, and within a couple of minutes she hears a cry from Lizzie saying, "Maggie, come quick! Somebody is father is dead. Somebody's broke in and killed him," or words to that effect. Well, she runs downstairs, and Lizzie tells her to go across the street to get Dr. Borden. The doctor live across the street. She does. She runs across the street. Another neighbor lady named Mrs. Adelaide Churchill, sees what's going on. She walks up, and Lizzie's standing near the screen door, and she says, "Lizzie, is everything all right?" She said, "Someone has killed father. Please come on in." So anyway, the doctor comes over, and they find on the couch Mr. Borden lying there, obviously had been asleep, and the entire side of his face had been hacked in. And there is this famous picture of Andrew Borden laying in that on his death couch with his face just one side completely obliterated. It is obvious he had no struggle. You can see, that he had been laying asleep. Probably the first or second blow probably killed him. I doubt he even saw who attacked him. So there's all this panic and all of in the house. And finally somebody asks, "Well, where is Mrs. Borden?" And once again, this time Lizzie says, "I don't know where she is." And she did go upstairs, I heard. Last time I saw her, she went upstairs. See any contradiction? So they tell Maggie to go check, and she's like, "I'm not going alone." So her and Mrs. Churchill went upstairs to check. And as they go up the steps, they're looking, on floor level into the bedroom where she had been making the bed. And there on the other side of the bed, they see her laying on the floor. And she had been hacked as well. The whole back of her head had been hacked like a block of ice with a hatchet. And it was actually discovered later on that because of the coagulating blood and from the autopsy, which by the way they did in the house on the kitchen table, the body laid on the kitchen table for 2 days in that heat, different times of sleeping in the house. Yeah, but it was determined that that Abby had been killed approximately about 90 minutes earlier, putting her death around 9:30. So we have the setup for that. That was the crime. This crime spread out through. Word of it spread quickly through the community. 2,000 people were standing outside the house. The police came in. They didn't know what to make of all this, and the crime was, and we're off with the crime. Now, what happened next was that when the police arrived and Dr. Borden had arrived and he looked at Mr. Borden's body, it was determined that, the blood was still dripping. He had been dead less than half an hour. He was a fresh kill. Now, the only two people in the house are Lizzie and Bridget. Bridget was upstairs, according to her testimony. So this crime had just taken place. Now, people first, there was all kinds of people. First, people thought this had been a maniac that broke in the house. However, there's a little problem with that. The Borden house set on 2nd Street, right in the busiest part of the commercial part of the town, and it's 11 o'clock in the morning, on a busy, hot August day. People coming and going, walking about, So for someone, there's only two ways in the house: a side door in the back of the kitchen and the front door. And someone covered in blood coming out of that house would have been noticed, and no one saw anyone leave that house around that time or go in that house. So, we're down to just the people in the house. Now, a lot of suspicion fell on Uncle Morris because, this coincidence that he happened to just be visiting and then he ended up dead the next day. However, when police checked, they found that he had a rock solid alibi that he had been visiting relatives that day and had been at their house, around these people's houses around that time. So he's completely out. Emma, of course, is out because she was in New Haven, nowhere even near. She wasn't even in town. So then it comes down to, well, maybe Bridget. But even Lizzie said Bridget had nothing to do with it. Plus, as far as the murder of now it's possible with Mr. Borden, Andrew Borden. She was in the house during that time, and let him in. However, whoever killed him, unless you want to argue that Bridget killed one and somebody else had killed Abby an hour and a half earlier, most likely logic says that this was done by the same person. And during the time that Abby was killed, a lot of people saw Bridget outside cleaning the windows. So that really rules her out. Plus, she has no motive. The only thing she's going to do is get fired, lose a job because she's killing her employees. So really, that left only one person in the house, and that was Lizzie. And there was finally an inquest that was held about 5 days later. And an inquest just to determine that a crime had been committed, and this time it's just a formality, obviously. You have two people hacked in the head, 13 times for Mrs. Borden, and it's somewhere between 18, it's figured, for Mr. Borden. So obviously a crime's been committed. But it wasn't the normal practice that you needed to be represented during this inquest. However, Lizzie was testified. It's the only time she testified during this inquest, and her lawyer was there with her, but he wasn't allowed to counsel her. And the prosecuting attorney, Norton, he was an expert at interrogation, and he took her up one side, down the other, talked about where she was, what she was doing, and finding her contradictions. I've read the transcript of what was said, and he just really raked her over the coals. And she kept being inconsistent. She kept as to where she was during each one of these crimes. With the mother, she said that she was either ironing handkerchiefs or she was reading a magazine. Either way, she just stays in the kitchen. But with her father, she said she was out back of the house in the barn looking for sinkers to go on a fishing trip, or she was eating pears, or that she didn't hear anything, or that she heard a cry and run in the house. She kept changing her testimony. started making her look bad. Now, and then she got confused. She said, I'm confused, I don't even know what to say. Now, in her defense, her doctor had actually been putting her on shots of morphine to calm her nerves. So that could have affected her mind in this testimony. However, it went so bad that even the judge said that, hey, if this was a man in front of me and you're the only person in the house and you can't give conflicting statements, I'd say you're most likely guilty. And it's actually my judgment that you should be held over you're most likely guilty and you should be held over for trial. So Lizzie was arrested. Lizzie sat in jail. They had to put her in a different jail because they didn't have a female warden. They had to send her to another jail in the next county. And she stayed there for 10 months waiting for a trial. However, now she and her sister are very wealthy women. And they hired two fantastic lawyers, a real dream team. They hired Jennings, who was their family lawyer, but then they also spurged out the money to get the former governor of Massachusetts to represent them. In fact, one of the three judges in their system, you had a three-judge panel, had actually been appointed by this governor. So the trial finally started. The trial went very well for Lizzie because it's really based on mostly circumstantial evidence. They had no blood, they had no weapon. A hatchet had been found in the house. It looked like it had been freshly broken off at the handle and put in an ash box. People think it may have been washed and put in there to try to dry, and that was presented in evidence. But the two things happened that her team managed to get done. Was that they got the inquest testimony kicked out, saying that she did not have counseling and was essentially already under arrest, and therefore it wasn't fair, kind of like an early Miranda verdict, and they kicked out the testimony. I think if they hadn't kicked out that testimony, Lizzie would have swung. She would have swung. She would have been hung. But it was kicked out. So that was one thing. But most of their case was therefore based on the dress incident. 3 days after the crime, even though they'd searched the house very well, a friend was over to the house with her sister, and Lizzie brought out a dress and said, "I'm going to burn this old dress." And her sister said, "Yeah, go ahead." So she stuffed it in the stove and burned it. And her friend told her, "I think that's the worst thing you could have done, burn that dress." She said, "Why did you let me do it?" So the insinuation was that she was burning the dress that she had used in the murders that may have had blood on it, because blood had become a big issue, which we'll talk about in a minute. However, the defense, they really knocked that out because they actually had a dressmaker come in, plus her sister, that said that they had made a dress for her about a year before, and she'd walked downstairs where some painters had been painting in the house, got paint on the dress, and it ruined it. They even brought in the painter to testify that this happened. So that kind of knocked out the dress theory. And actually, I personally don't believe that was the dress she was wearing. I think it was just a coincidence and a stupid move. She just decided to burn a dress about that time. I think it was just a really bad coincidence for her. So there really is no evidence. And another thing that was pointed out is that she had no blood on her. Everyone that came in, Doc Borden, Mrs. Churchill, Bridget, they all said that she was immaculate. She had no blood on her clothes. And to hack someone to death in the head with a hatchet, there was blood all up the walls, all over the floor. She would have had blood spatter all over her, or at least some on her. There was nothing. They all said she was pristine. So that right there, that, and the biggest thing, this is the Victorian era, and she was a woman, and a woman they were too fragile, and it was not their nature to commit this type of crime. Poison was the weapon of women that killed, not hacking someone to death, especially your father. To the Victorian mentality, they just could not accept that Lizzie would have done this, that a woman could commit this type of violent crime. This took a masculine violence, as they said. So just as much as the lack of evidence, the fact that her gender actually probably saved her, because the jury was out less than 30 minutes and they found her not guilty of murder. Well, Lizzie went home afterwards, and now her and her sister are quite wealthy. They inherited roughly about $300,000, which in 1893 money, that's about $10 million, and they divided it between themselves. Plus, they still have the income coming in from all their father's businesses. So they're quite wealthy women. They stayed on a few months, and then they moved, and Lizzie got what she wanted. She got the big house on the hill. She called it Maplecroft, which most people saw as a bit ostentatious and pretentious. She put around the marble on the front. But it was a beautiful house. It was 14 rooms. She had a winter bath. She had a winter bedroom and bath, a summer bedroom and bath. House was decorated in carved wood, and Tiffany lamps, and crystal, and painted porcelain in the bathrooms. It was absolutely a beautiful home. She had servants. She had a carriage and a carriage driver. So she'd hit the big time. However, Fall River had passed its own judgment. Very similar to the O.J. Simpson trial. A lot of people made parallels between the two, which are almost 100 years apart. But even though everybody rallied around her during the trial, once she was found innocent, Fall River pretty much judged her as guilty, and she was ostracized in that town the rest of her life. In fact, when she went back to her church, they had the Borden pew. When she sat down, people moved away from around her. But yet, Lizzie never left. Stubborn, maybe still hoping to be something in the society, maybe just trying to uphold her dignity, but whatever, she never left the town. She stayed there in her house. However, Emma didn't. Sometime about 1904, she and Lizzie had a falling out, most likely over Lizzie's fondness for inviting theater troops. She loved the theater. She'd invite the troops over for parties, and those people were seen as like the equivalent of prostitutes and thieves in a city like Fall River. So this was just not done. And either way, she and Emma had a falling out. Emma moved away, and they never spoke again. And they actually died Lizzie died first, and Emma died 9 days later in another state, in Vermont. Yeah. So Lizzie lived out her life pretty much isolated and alone, and though wealthy. She was very fond of her pets in her beautiful home. And she finally passed away due to pneumonia after having her gallbladder removed in 1927 at the age of 66. So a ripe age for that time period. So that's the whole life of Lizzie Borden. Now next we're going to talk about my theory and whether I think she did it or not. Okay, now let's talk about what I think is true and whether or not I think Lizzie is guilty, and also my theory as to how she would have done it. First, after much research, as well as visiting the house, yes, I believe I'm about 95, maybe more like 98% positive that Lizzie Borden killed both of her parents with a hatchet. The reasons, well, there's basically two, that I'll go over. One, she is really the only person that could have done it. She was the only person in the house during during both murders. There's no sign of anyone going in or out of that house on that busy day, which that would have been noticed. Also, she is the only person present that had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Her motive being a miserly father, his death would make her a very vastly wealthy woman. The fact that she was the only person in the house the whole time with her mother and then with her father, and was alone with both at the time, and the means. Well, there was obviously an axe in the house, wasn't there? That was found. So yes, to me, she is the only one that could have done it. But it's not just that. Number two is her conflicting testimonies and conflicting statements that do not match the facts of that day. And also some of the obvious lies she told that practically point to her being the killer. First, let's talk about one of the most obvious to me, and that would be the supposed note that was sent to Abby saying someone was sick and that she left. Now, Bridget heard her say this to her father, and she also said it later on after the murders when the ladies came over. But interestingly, when the ladies came over, they asked her, "Where is your mother?" She said, "I do not know. She went upstairs to change went upstairs." Thought she said she was going upstairs. Well, what about the note? So also this note was never found. No one in town, and a great investigation was given trying to find this note or find out what was sick. Nobody's sick and nobody sent a note. So this is an obvious lie. There's even a reward offered for this, and they never found this note. This note didn't exist. So it's very obviously that she lied. And the reason I know that she lied was, and something else that points, I think this whole note thing points to her guilt, is when her father come home, he asked where she was, and she give this note story. Now, when exactly did this note supposedly come? She said the last time in her own testimony, she contradicts herself. She said the last time she saw her mother, she's going upstairs to make the bed, to put all the pillowcases to make the bed. So, so therefore, how does she, if that's the last time she saw her, how does she know she left the house? How does she know, when did she find out about this note? But the thing is, she said this, and how did she know that her mom was in the house? Why did she not know her mom was in the house? It's obvious. Because she knew her mother was dead. She knew that there was no way she's going to be coming downstairs. So therefore, she had to make up this story to her father, or he would have found that she'd been laying on the dead on the floor for over an hour. To me, that points right to her guilt. She lied about this note, and she knew she had to lie about the note because she knew there was no way her mother was coming downstairs because she was upstairs and dead, and the only way she could be upstairs and dead is if she killed her. So right there, that's one. The other thing, and this is what really, I like to weigh things out, and I don't like to pass a verdict on something until I look at everything. And I was like, well, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But what convinced me was I went to that house and I walked in that bedroom where her mother was killed. Now, that bedroom, for one thing, let's talk about Abby's position. She's laying face down on the floor on the far end of the bed. The bed run horizontal to the doors. And now this house, by the way, has a different type of model. It's built more like a row house. Rectangular, only 20 feet wide, with a stairwell going up. However, it doesn't have a hallway. There's a little landing, and you go to the top of the stairs there right in front of the bedroom. But it's one of these type of houses. I lived in a house like this as a kid, where you don't have a hallway, where each room leads into the next room. So there's no hallway to go into, except this landing. Now, the thing is, when you look at, like I said, when you look at her body, she is laying face down. The room, you can see from the photograph, the room is not disturbed. Nothing's been pulled, nothing's been knocked over. And it's very obvious from her wounds. All of her wounds are on her head, the back of her head. Apparently, she'd been attacked from behind, and she apparently did not see it coming. There's no struggle. There's no defense wounds on the arms, on the hands, in the body, straight in the head, and nothing's disturbed in the room. So therefore, someone must have surprised her, come up behind her and whacked her in the head, killed her. She didn't even know it. She just goes down. They just keep whacking at her head. So this is very obviously a surprise killing, and she'd never seen it coming. And that's an issue, because when I got in that house, I'd always assumed maybe the door was behind her, and that they'd come in and snuck around to the back of her. No. The door, like I said, the bed is parallel. She's on the far end. On the other side, as you can see here, is the door that goes to the stairs. That's the reason they could see her under the bed when they walked up the steps. Now, the only other door, that door would have been directly across from her. Her standing here, the door's right here in front of her, with the steps going down to the living room. The only other door is directly in front of her that goes into Emma's bedroom. Now, and plus, it's bringing to another thing. It was an old house even then, an old wood house. If you've ever been in an old wood house and you walk up steps, then they squeak, the nails pop, there's the creaking. It's impossible to walk in an old wooden house without making a noise. Especially these women that were wearing those high-heeled boots that they were wearing, those high-heeled boots and shoes. There's no way that somebody come up and she wouldn't hear it. So, and there's no way making this bed, or very little, unless she's just really not paying attention, that someone could have come from the door in front of her, or from someone from the side, making that much racket, walking around with an axe, and come at her, hack her to death without her seeing them coming. It's just impossible, or near impossible. So therefore, there's only two ways this has to go. Either she just really didn't hear them, and they came in, they walked behind her and hacked her, and she didn't see it, which to me, like I said, is practically impossible. Or, most likely, she saw who come up those stairs, or who come through that door, and it was somebody that she knew. And not only that, but somebody she trusted to be behind her. Completely unexpected. There's nobody heard a scream, nobody heard any commotion, nothing. And they've actually done sound tests, and her screaming like would have been heard outside, and people would have heard it. There was nothing. Plus, Lizzie said she never heard anything. But that's another problem. So therefore, whoever came up behind her is somebody she saw and somebody she knew. And there's only one person in the house. Lizzie Borden. Also, there's another contradiction there. Mrs. Borden was a woman of about over 200 pounds. She's a short, hefty gal. Now, Lizzie is sitting in the kitchen directly below that room. Now, you hit this woman in the back of the head with an axe, and you're hacking at her. One, she's going to hit that floor like a sack of bricks. And that's a small, narrow house. It would have rattled the entire house. In fact, they've done seismic tests and showed that it would have been loud, and Lizzie's going to say she's downstairs ironing handkerchiefs or reading a magazine, and she didn't hear this 200-pound weight slam on the floor and somebody hacking at her head, right over her head. It's a contradiction. I don't see that happening. So therefore, there's this one. The minute I saw that doorway, the minute that I saw the setup of that room, I said right out loud in the tour, "Oh my God, she did it! She did it. She's the only person that could have killed her mother." And you throw in the whole lie about the note and the fact that she knew her mother was not in the house, or at least not able to come downstairs, points to Lizzie killing her. Plus, Lizzie was the only person in the house as Bridget was outside. I think that's pretty clear. Now, the other thing that comes up is like, well, and this came up in the OJ trial too. Well, if she did it, where's the blood? And it's true. She had a limited time to do this. We're talking if Mr. Borden got home, let's say around, Bridget said he got home just before 11. But yet she managed to go upstairs and all this going on. So let's say he got home, let's say around 10:40, somewhere in that area. And she goes upstairs. That gives Lizzie about 15 to 20 minutes. Because Bridget said that it rang 11, and just right a few minutes after that, let's say by 11:05, she hears, between 11 and 11:05, she hears Lizzie call for her. So you're talking probably 15, 20 minutes. How did she kill this man, splattering blood everywhere, all up the walls, everywhere, hacking at his head so many times with a hatchet, and not get blood all over her that it was not noticeable to everyone, in her hair, on her face, on her hands, on her clothes? She doesn't seem to have time to hack him to death, change clothes, take a bath, clean her hair, all of that, get redressed and all that. In 20 minutes to get, plus she's got to pump up, go downstairs to do all this. Doesn't seem she has enough time. However, so and that was a big part of the defense. She had no blood on her. How could you do this without blood? Now, one of the speculations has become very famous. In fact, in the 1970s movie, a TV movie made by starring Elizabeth Montgomery as Lizzie Borden, which incidentally, and she didn't know it at the time, Lizzie Borden was actually her distant cousin. In fact, it wasn't found out until after Elizabeth Montgomery died that she's actually playing her own cousin. But in that version, they have that the one way that Lizzie could have done it is if she had stripped nude and then killed her father. When it got blood on her, she could have washed off really quick, put her clothes back on, and cried. And that would be a possibility, except for a couple of things. One, women of that day in the type of dress they wore, she would have needed help get back into that dress. They tied in the back. Anybody that's worn those old dresses, knows, to get the boots on, get everything on, change the clothes. It would have actually took a lot longer to get to do than if she just had, So that doesn't seem to be as romantic as it is, and they've used it in the 2018 movie with Chloe Sevigny, her stripping down nude to kill her father. It's very romantic. It's very erotic in kind of a sick way, but I don't think it's really possible. So it does beg the question, and it's been a big one, how did she do this without getting blood all over her? Well, here you come to my theory. And I think that the answer has been right in her face the entire time. And that I'm talking about this photo, famous photo of Andrew Borden laying on his death couch not long after the murder. I want you to take a really good look at this picture and tell me what's wrong. And I don't know why. Maybe other people have noticed this and they wrote it off. I don't know. But it's what I've noticed. And I've never read anybody talk about this. Look at this picture. And I want you to look at what's under his head. It's a wool overcoat. A wool, and it's under the pillow he's laying on. Why is that there? Well, remember again, it was a stifling hot day. Everybody testifies that. They said the stores were like ovens. It was so super hot. It was like, somewhere between 90 and 95 degrees. And because this is, in Massachusetts, it would have been extremely humid. So why is this heavy winter overcoat out? And why is this stuffed under his head? Now, this, from all photos, and plus they did have a maid, this was a very straight home. This is a very straight house. A very tidy house. It's a small house as far as in width, so they kept it very tidy. That's apparent. So a winter coat like this would not be out. It had been put away until the fall. It had been put away in late spring and until early fall in some storage closet somewhere. So why is it out? Now it's true. Older people often, get cold nature. We lose some fat as we get older, and older people get cold. However, he was a man about to turn 70, and he's, it's 90-something degrees, and he's already wearing a suit, a breasted suit, wearing a three-piece suit. If he'd had on a wool overcoat at 90-degree heat, he would have had a heat stroke. And there's no testimony of anyone seeing him that day or him having a habit of wearing this coat. So why is this coat out? It doesn't make sense. I think I know why it's out. And it's so simple, it's genius. And I want you to look at the coat, the way it's there. It's not just folded under his head. It's like it's been stuffed in from the middle under his head, as though his head was already lying on it at the time when it was put there. So here's what I think happened. Bridget goes upstairs. Her father lays down. So Lizzie goes and gets this coat, this thick, long coat. She wasn't very tall. This had hung down past her knees. And she gets the hatchet. She comes up through the doorway there from the kitchen to her father. She hacks him to death. Blood splatters all over, up the walls, been splattering over the coat. And maybe she even had, a scarf on her head. That's possible too. She hacks him to death. All the blood's going to be on the coat. She takes the coat off, and instead of trying to hide it, she stuffs it. It looks like it's been stuffed under his bleeding head, thus giving justification for it to be covered in blood. It's basically hiding her own crime. Then all she has to do is wash her hands, maybe wash her face off. If she wasn't wearing a scarf, which I think she may have, take a rag and just wipe her hair off. That would have done it. Just been little speckles anyway. Throw the axe away, either down the privy, or it could have been the one she broke and hid, washed, broke and hid, and go back upstairs and start yelling, "My father's dead." She could easily do that in 20 minutes. And it's so simple, it's genius. And I think that the whole answer is this coat. That's my theory. And I think it's worthy of some investigation, don't you? So that's how that I think Lizzie Borden killed her mother and father on August 4th, 1892. Well, that's all I've got, folks. I know this is a little different than what I normally do, and don't worry, but if you do enjoy me giving these type of talks on some of my interests, I do have, a master's degree in comparative religious studies. I also studied Egyptology. So if there's any of these type of topics you like, plus I study the crime and mysteries. If you like these type of content, would you please let me know down in the comments below. Don't mind doing more. Now, don't worry, fear not. I will definitely be doing tutorial material in the future. In fact, I have one coming up, and probably in the next day or so on coats. I think that'd be a good way to segue into winter coats, as well as plenty of other material. But if you do like this, please let me know. And of course, if you haven't already joined my channel, please hit this little King Henry head with my pretty face, and subscribe. And also give me a like if you're liking listening to my big mouth. You can also reach me on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And I love to hear from you guys. And, I know this may have been a little bit of a longer video. If you stuck around, I thank you. So if you have interest in things like this, be like me. Study them up, follow your passions, and while you do it, you stay tuned.